Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, basketball fans of all ages, we are back and better than ever. You are listening to Let's Talk NBA Podcast. On our show, we will cover all the hot topics in the association with special guests each week. So, without further ado, here is the voice of Let's Talk NBA Podcast, Alex Golden.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Let's Talk NBA podcast. On today's show, joining me once again is Jeff Garcia, and he just got off a nice Spurs 4-2 victory over the Memphis Grizzlies. I guess you can take that for data, huh?
Yeah, well, I'll take that for data, and I'm hopefully taking a lot of the data from the Spurs series win against Memphis onto facing the Houston Rockets, which should be a very, very exciting, fun series. And who knows, I almost want to, dare I say, flip a coin and say who heads, tails, Spurs or Rockets. I mean, I'm right there right now, but I'm pretty sure during this show, somehow, some way, I'm going to say, the Spurs are going to win the series.
I mean, if you're looking at who's got the best player, I think hands down Kawhi Leonard is the best player in the Western Conference right now. And Greg Popovich had a very bold statement last night saying he thinks Kawhi Leonard is the best player in the league. But you look at both Memphis and Houston, these are totally different teams. You go from grind and grit in Memphis to, hardly ever wanting to touch you in Houston, so to say. They want to push the pace and run you to death. How are the Spurs going to be able to adapt to such a different style of game?
Well, the good news is that I think playing Memphis actually prepared the Spurs mentally and physically against a Houston team that had much success in the regular season. And I get it, regular season doesn't count. It's a brand new season that the Spurs and Rockets are on right now. But if we're going to take that for data, the Spurs were 3-1 versus Houston in the regular season. The Spurs were able to contain as best as they could James Harden and defended him from the three-point line, where he only shot 29% from the three-point range. If you go on, when it came down to close games against the Rockets during the regular season, the Spurs were able to grind it out, no pun intended, and get a win. And the teams were only separated by a total of 8 points, and it came in the Spurs' favor across the 4 games. 3 of those 4 games were decided only by 2 points. And this is where the defense kicks in. Now, look, the Spurs are once again facing their whipping boy, Mike D'Antoni, who Popovich and the Spurs have had tremendous success against his style. Back in the heyday of the Phoenix Suns with Nash, Amari, and Sean Marion, they run that, 7 seconds or less. Spurs just trounced them. Now, I get it. These are 2 different teams, 2 different eras, different time, different place. But if D'Antoni is still wanting to do that run and flow and offensively minded approach, Spurs should be sitting pretty. I mean, they were able to hold Houston to just a little over 100 points, which is good because considering the Rockets just light up the scoreboard, they did their best to contain the Rockets. You add the fact they have the best defender, in my opinion. The NBA is obviously going to pick Draymond Green, but it's going to be Kawhi Leonard. He's going to be hounding James Harden. They have an underrated, undervalued defender, Danny Green, also to play alongside Kawhi Leonard. And hopefully Dwayne Dedmon can come alive and play the defense in the middle like we know he can, where he was almost kind of a non-factor in the Memphis series. But you're looking at him, and of course, LaMarcus Aldridge to do his thing. The Spurs should be okay. Defensively, they're one of the top teams right now currently in the playoffs at holding teams. Well, at least against the Grizzlies, they definitely proved it. But the one thing I am worried about is simply this, is will the team show up? And that's my biggest concern right now, because during the Memphis series, there are many times where it was just a 1-man, 2-man show at best versus Memphis, Kawhi and Parker. And that's it. That was it. And you saw the game where Kawhi went crazy. He went in supernova and almost got the Spurs the win. But you got a guy like Manu Ginobili, he only came alive 1 game, which is in Game 5, where he scored 10 points. Patty Mills barely caught fire towards the end of the series. You got something from LaMarcus Aldridge, and I mean something. Yes, statistically, he was mediocre at best. He did put up double-digit scoring, close to double-digit rebounding, but it just wasn't enough. Fortunately for the Spurs, he came alive in the game-winning Game 6 series clincher versus Memphis. But my biggest fear right now is, can the Spurs pour in points when they needed to? They really didn't need to against a Memphis team that was grit and grind and, slow and grind it out. And if they beat you if the final score is 80-82, Memphis is usually going to win that. This is a whole different animal now. You got guys like Eric Gordon, who is pretty much, in my opinion, I think one of the leading candidates for Sixth Man of the Year right now. He is just playing great for Houston in this postseason. He's averaging 33 points 13.6 points off the bench, 4.6 rebounds, 1.6 assists, shooting 42% from the field, 36% from the 3-point line. Can the Spurs have that other reliable scorer? Now, right now, it looks like Tony Parker. And heading into the Memphis series, many were looking at him as he's the weakest link. How in the world is he going to contend with a Mike Conley? And lo and behold, he turned the clock. He found the fountain of youth, and he held his own offensively versus Mike Conley. Defensively, he's still a shade of a little bit of a liability. Will he be that again against Patrick Beverley, who is going to try to lock him down? When against Memphis, Tony Allen didn't play. I think it would have been a whole other story if Tony Allen played versus San Antonio. Would Parker have lit up the scoreboard as he did in the Game 6 or in the Game 1 where he scored 20? I don't know. But now Parker is going to be really, really tested right now. Put him on James Harden defensively. James Harden might burn him. Put Patrick Beverley on him on the defensive end for Houston. Can Parker get away with that and contend with Beverly's intense defense and in-your-face attitude and not afraid to talk smack? Even talk smack to Russell Westbrook. I mean, come on. You think he's going from Westbrook to Parker? I think Beverly's probably licking his lips right now saying, I got a 34-year-old old man Parker after just coming off playing Westbrook. But nonetheless, the Spurs did show that at least in the regular season they can play with Houston. They can win out these close games. They can pour the points in because, again, if you're looking at what the Spurs did offensively in the regular season versus Houston, they were able to put up 112 points in their first meeting, 102 points in the second meeting, 106, and then 99 in their lone loss to Houston. But even at that, it was 99-101 Houston wins. So these games have been close. I expect a similar thing, with the one exception is if defense wins titles, I'm going to give the edge to Pop and the Spurs over Mike D'Antoni and the Rockets.
Yeah, I think you hit on something really, really good there at the end. And defensively, I have said this about the Rockets. I feel like they are beatable. I feel like they were the most beatable out of the top 4 seeds. Obviously, Los Angeles and Utah, those are kind of a wash because they're 4-5. But I mean, out of the top 3 seeds, really, Houston does not play great defense. And so when you have Nene banging down low as your big man, I mean, he's not blocking shots. He's not a great rim protector. He's okay. And in other areas, you're looking at like Trevor Ariza. He's a streaky shooter. Patrick Beverley's streaky. And I like San Antonio's chances here because they just play good team basketball. But one thing I am concerned about is, just their ability. Like you said, in the regular season they were able to score, but, consistently, how well will these Spurs be able to score against the Rockets without, Kawhi and, LaMarcus doing everything for them?
Yeah, and then I would even lump LaMarcus into the pile of will you show up pile because he kind of sort of not, but then again he kind of did during Memphis. If anything, I'm looking at the peripheral players like Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol went scoreless in Game 6 in Memphis. Danny Green, who still can't find his shot. Now, granted, he was carrying a heavy load on the defensive end, trying to disrupt Conley and do whatever he can. So maybe he gets a pass, but his 3-point shot is still not going down with consistency. You have Patty Mills, who did come to life and did have a spark in the last couple of games, scored 20 points in one game. But can he maintain that? Because he was kind of up and down during the series against Memphis. Now, you're looking at the numbers. If we're going to go back to defense, and I think that's what's going to win out, the Spurs beating Houston and advancing, the Spurs right now are ranked third in opponents' points per game in the postseason, while the Rockets are ninth. Granted, it's a small sample size, quote unquote, because both teams just played one team. Right now, we're going to see what happens in the next series. But if we're going to, I feel like this is going to be a running joke now. We're going to take that for data. You're looking at the Spurs. They rank second in making their 3-point shots, though, at 41%, while the Rockets are ranked 16th at 3-point field goal percentage at 28%. So that seems like it flip-flopped. Yeah, exactly. The worst. And again, going back to those defensive numbers, as I mentioned, the opponent points per game, Spurs ranked third, 96.3, while Rockets allow 104.2, and that's good for ninth in the postseason among the field. But all in all, the Spurs should win it. Now, if there's anything on the defensive end that worries me for San Antonio, is simply this, that the Rockets out-rebounded the Spurs by 6 rebounds per game and had 20 more offensive rebounds, 12.8 offensive rebounds in the 4 games of the regular season. It's kind of a head-scratcher for me because they don't have Dwight Howard anymore. They have Clinton Capella and Nene and sure, but this is a team that's loaded with bigs, LaMarcus, Dedmon, Powell, David Lee as well. That was a little interesting for me. That stuck out when I looked back at the 4-game series and saw that the Rockets out-rebounded. The Spurs definitely, that's one of their keys to victory this series. They have to focus on the rebounding, boxing out, doing the little things. I hope Popovich, and I know he's probably rearing those guys up to be mindful about the rebounding, because those rebounds that go to Houston just simply create what? You know and I know. More opportunities for James Harden to score. More opportunities for a guy like Eric Gordon. More opportunities for a guy like Patrick Beverley to just come alive and knock down threes like he did show against Oklahoma City. Ryan Anderson, he's deadly from deep. So all in all, Spurs got to fix that rebounding issue they had in the regular season. They got to look for more help and fix that in the 3-game break, the 3-day or 2-day break before Monday night's game. They got to they still have some stuff to do on the drawing board, but I'm coming in a little confident. I think playing a Memphis team kind of woke them up a bit that they can't come in lackadaisical. I mean, they had almost double-digit turnovers at one point during the series. Everybody's got to pitch in, and maybe sometimes Kawhi Leonard does need help. And I'm looking at you, LaMarcus Aldridge. I'm looking at you, Tony Parker. I'm looking at you, Danny Green. I'm looking at you, Pau Gasol. Those guys got to step up.
You hit on quite a bit there, and I want to go back to, you bringing up the Rockets' 3-point shooting being so low. And one thing that the Oklahoma City Thunder did very well was they took away James Harden his 3-point shot, and they forced him to drive and then kind of, suckered him into, going into Steven Adams, trying to play one-on-one, shooting over Adams or kicking out to shooters. And I think if you can limit James Harden's 3-point shot, then, that really helps you out. But at the same time, you can't leave those open shooters because that's what the Rockets have built around. They have guys that can knock down threes from every position besides the center position. So, however, I feel like their best shooters are on the bench with Eric Gordon and Lou Williams, and they don't really play a lot with James Harden. So it kind of, those are more create-your-own shot types of 3-point shots. So taking away the 3-pointer from James Harden will really, prevent the Rockets from going on a tear from the 3-point line. However, you have to make sure that the Nenes and the Capellas don't just get wide-open dunks, and I think that might be a reason they get a lot of offensive rebounds. Harden's drawing so much attention and people are focused on him, and then you get long shots where those are easier to rebound for the offensive player because they might know where it's going. So that's one thing that the Spurs are really going to have to lock down on, and we hit on this earlier, Danny Green's defense on Mike Conley. Mike Conley is a great basketball player and maybe one of the most underrated point guards in the league, and Danny Green did a fine job on him. So now he's I think he's going to have to be able to help Kawhi and so Kawhi doesn't have to guard James Harden every single time down the court because that'll wear you out. And, James Harden's not a great defender. I mean, I think that he's improved over the past couple of seasons. Mm-hmm. But, if he's, guarding the weakest link on offense, which would probably be Danny Green if he's starting, mm-hmm. That's going to save up all his energy for offense. So you can't have Kawhi expending 42-plus minutes on offense and defense, because we saw in Game 6 versus the Grizzlies, Pop started Kawhi on the bench in the fourth quarter, and things didn't look too hot. So he's like, okay, Parker, okay, Kawhi, let's get this over with. I'm tired of playing these Memphis Grizzlies. I need you back. And what did he do? He scored 6 straight points, got him right back in the game. So, Pop's obviously an incredible coach, and just making sure that Kawhi is not, overexposed, and his usage rate, I guess you could say, on defense and offense will be key for the San Antonio Spurs. Yeah,
you're talking about Harden in this postseason. This at least against the Oklahoma City Thunder, he was only shooting 23% from the 3-point line, and so hopefully, that'll continue versus San Antonio. But I want to go back to this whole the Rockets out rebounding the Spurs. Most of that too is done on purpose by San Antonio. They'll give up the offensive rebounds just to hustle back on the defensive end to stop the transition offense of Houston. So sometimes that could be a little deceiving. I think they're willing to give that up and just go back on defense and play defense against a high-octane, offensive-minded Houston Rockets team. But the Spurs, if like I say, they say their defense wins titles in the postseason, then the Spurs have that in droves versus Houston. Houston has improved on defense. Even James Harden has improved on defense. You got to give him some credit, but he had a low bar set. What is only where to go up after playing atrocious defense. And speaking of defense, you mentioned Danny Green. You look at what he's done in that Memphis series. He actually leads the Spurs right now in the postseason in blocks per game. Not LaMarcus Aldridge, not Dwayne Dedmon, not Pau Gasol, not even Kawhi Leonard. It's Danny Green. And in the regular season, he had 7 games with 4+ blocks, which is the most ever of all Spurs guards. So he does bring the defense, but his shooting is going to be definitely needed against this Rockets team that's going to want to run. And if the Spurs cannot get somebody else aside that isn't named Kawhi Leonard to put up points, the Spurs could be in for a long series.
Yeah, they could. And, you're speaking of Dwayne Dedmon, and he didn't really get a lot of minutes in the past series, and I feel like he was just outmatched with Marcus Gasol and Zach Randolph just being too big. But I feel like the Rockets, present a very, good opportunity for him to really showcase his athleticism and his, ability to be more mobile than a Pau Gasol or a David Lee. So, how do you think, Dedmon improves? Do you think he'll be able to produce in this series, or do you think, the playoffs are just a little bit too big for him and you're going to have to rely on those veterans that have been there for a while?
No, I think he's gonna be okay in this Houston series. If you look at the Dedmon acquisition, it pretty much screamed, we need a mobile defensive big guy to play against the Warriors. That's what it felt like. He's not really a plotter. He's not gonna just bulk up, be that bulky guy, and just take up space in the paint and just be a bruiser. You got Capella. He's not that much. Well, he's height wise, yeah, but he's not big and bulky like Randolph was or Marcus Gasol was. You have a Nene who is a bruiser, but he's a little undersized, and I think Dedmon can be okay with that. And then off the bench for Houston, I mean, what do you have? Who really? What is their big man depth? I mean, it's not really what Decker. I don't know.
I think he's actually out. Sam Decker's out. I think they have Montrezl Harrell.
Yeah, Montrezl, who's an energy guy, and yeah, great, but I think Dedmon will be okay. He'll be fine. And better late than never. Fine. Maybe he was just outmatched in that Memphis series, and the Spurs were still able to get past Memphis without his services. Well, there's going to be time for him to make up for that, and what a perfect way right now than against Houston Rockets. So all in all, the Spurs, they're riding high. They're going into Houston with home court advantage, and they have history on their side as far as the regular season is concerned, 3-1. They should be okay, but there is still work to be done in these days off for San Antonio on both ends of the court.
What is the biggest threat that the Houston Rockets have to offer the San Antonio Spurs?
Oh, simply this. They have more offensive firepower, reliable and more consistent firepower on the offensive end than San Antonio. Lou Williams, you mentioned, we know what James Harden can do. You know what Ryan Anderson can do. You know what Eric Gordon can do. And I think the Spurs, you know what you're going to get out of Kawhi Leonard on both sides of the court, but Danny Green, you know, will he start knocking down his shots? Tony Parker, can he still play at this clip that he showed during Memphis against Houston, and now having to be pestered by a Patrick Beverley more than likely?
Yeah.
Will Manu Ginobili stop putting up goose eggs? There's so many. I have too many questions on the offensive end for San Antonio than I do with Houston. Houston, I know what I'm going to get. It's a little bit more consistency. Spurs haven't shown that consistent offensive punch that Houston has.
That's definitely true, and I saw that in that Memphis series. It just seemed like so many times the Spurs struggled to score. Now, I really like Patty Mills, and I think he could be the X factor here for the Spurs, but I really like him playing out there with Tony Parker, and I like him playing out there with Kawhi Leonard. Any chance that we'll get a chance to see those three out there a little bit more than what we saw in the last series?
There's a chance, but knowing Pop, he's going to stick to his guns and go with the lineup. He'll probably revert back to the original lineup of LMA and Dedmon and Parker and Green and Kawhi, and I think you're going to see that. It worked in the offseason. The regular season is probably he's trying to roll the dice. I think it's going to work again. Now, if Beverly, it's funny. I look at Beverly as actually the X factor for Houston, and I think if he starts shutting down Parker, who's going to be the second facilitator? You're going to rely on a DeJounte Murray, a rookie, a Patty Mills who can light up the scoreboard, but can he run the team? Can he be the facilitator that the Spurs need? Manu Ginobili, he's kind of sometimes, him and Kyle Anderson are sometimes the de facto point guards in situations. I wouldn't want them playing out of position, but so I think there's just, I'm confident the Spurs are going to win the series, and I think it's going to be in 6 or 7 games, but I have question marks, and the Spurs fans, they're actually voicing their opinion to me pretty much today, pretty much saying they're scared of Houston. They think Houston is a legit and considerable team that can bounce the Spurs out of the playoffs. I don't think it's that point. I think the Spurs can handle Houston. I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be what you saw in the regular season. You're going to see exactly in the playoffs in this series. But in those games, the Spurs had players that stepped up and scored the bucket. Yeah. The Spurs in the postseason haven't shown that. That's what I'm worried about.
Well, one thing that I'm excited to see is I'm really excited to see how LMA plays against Ryan Anderson, because let's be honest, Ryan Anderson is not a great defender. He is just there to stretch the floor, and that's about all he's going to do. So I think LaMarcus is really going to have to take advantage of that. And if the Spurs are smart, which they are, they're going to have to play at their pace and not get caught in a running game with the Rockets, because that's the last thing they want to do. Now, I know a lot of Spurs fans might be worried about the Rockets, but I feel like the Rockets have kind of been like that sexy pick from everybody nationally to challenge the Warriors, because they play a similar style, and they've had decent success against them. So it makes sense why a lot of national guys might like that. But at the end of the day, this is Popovich that we're talking about. And I think last year losing to the Thunder left a bad taste in Kawhi's mouth, and I think that's overlooked. I mean, I think Kawhi wants to prove that, he is one of the best players in the league, and he does that by not talking about it, but does it by showing on the court. And I love what he said in his post-game interview a couple days ago when he said, I don't care if I'm the best player, I want to be on the best team. And that is exactly what wins championships, is a team effort. And so that's why you see, big threes form and stuff like that. Well, you don't really have that in San Antonio. You have Popovich, and you have a system that works, and then you have a go-to guy. So, going back to LaMarcus versus Ryan Anderson, How do you think LaMarcus does in this series overall? Do you think he'll actually show up and play, or do you think he'll become a shell of himself?
I don't think he'll be a shell of himself. I think he'll play a lot better than he showed against Memphis. I think Brian Anderson, as much as he can stretch that floor, LaMarcus, he has to respect LaMarcus Aldridge on the offensive end when LMA has the ball. I'm looking at LMA to try to get him in foul trouble if push comes to shove like that. But I think LaMarcus will be fine. I think his numbers will spike a bit. But again, the offense and the defense begins with Kawhi Leonard, so you'll see Leonard continue to dominate the ball. I think Parker has shown something in this postseason. You're going to see him get a lot of calls for himself, see how Harden or Beverly has to deal in defending TP. And we're talking about Tony Parker. Just look what he's doing in this postseason. He's averaging 16.3 points per game, 3 assists, 2.2 rebounds. He's 17 for 17 from the free throw line. He hasn't missed a free throw in this postseason. He's shooting 53% from the 3-point line and 53% from the field. And he's doing this all in 27 minutes per game. So he keeps this up. Houston has a handful trying to deal with number 9.
I like the way Tony Parker's been playing, and I like seeing when Kawhi has the ball, him playing off the ball, because Tony Parker's an underrated shooter, and he's really good in the mid-game, or the mid-range, I should say, and that's kind of a lost art here in the NBA because everybody wants to shoot threes or layups, and I love that mid-range game that he brings, and that shot that Kawhi has developed has just really, taken me by storm. I just love it. I love watching him just go to work, and I don't know if you've listened to the recent one of the recent Zach Lowe podcast. I think it was with Howard Beck, and they were just talking about Kawhi, and the whole thing was like comparing someone to the next Jordan and how that's kind of ended. And on his Bleacher Report, Howard Beck's Bleacher Report article, and they asked around the league, and they said honestly, the person that reminds them the most of Jordan in today's era is Kawhi Leonard. And I thought that was just kind of neat because we've seen Kawhi just grow so much in Pop's system. So it'll be interesting to me just to see how well he plays. And there is just one aspect that I wanted to get your opinion on. Is there any chance that we see Kawhi play the 4 and LaMarcus play the 5 with possibly Danny Green, Tony Parker, and Patty Mills at all?
I can see that, especially against Houston. You didn't really need to see that against Memphis, but obviously Houston is a different animal. I like it. I've been an advocate of it. I want to see how it works, but I'm not actually worried about Leonard playing that spot. I'm actually worried about LMA playing the spot. He's very, very comfortable at the 4 in the block and doing big power forward things. And he's been very vocal, even in Portland, that he doesn't want to play center and this and that. And I want to test it. And sometimes I want to flip it and put Pau Gasol at the 4 sometimes just to see what happens with that mix. But I wouldn't put it past Pop to try it if needed. But I don't think the Spurs will go there many times during this series against Houston.
Yeah, I don't either. I was just thinking like that'd be really fun to see because I feel like they could pull some just crazy mismatches out there. But at the end of the day, Popovich knows what works best, and he's, like you said, had great success against D'Antoni in the playoffs and this season. So I think you and I are on the same page. I really do think that the Spurs win this. I'm not sure in how many games. It'll probably be 6 or 7. I think it'll be a competitive series because Houston's going to get hot. They're going to have a couple games where they're just hitting everything, and there's only so much offense that the Spurs can produce with this roster, and that's kind of where I'm a little worried is because I don't want Kawhi to have to literally do everything every single game because it's going to be impossible, especially against such a high offensive power team. So go ahead, give me your predictions if you have any, and just final predictions and what your thoughts are possibly on the next round, facing Golden State.
Oh, I think the Spurs will advance to the finals, and more than likely play Golden State. I think the Spurs beat Houston in 6 or 7 games, hopefully 6. They're going to need all the rest they can muster up should they play Golden State. Houston's not going to go down without a fight. I think playing against Oklahoma also prepared them for San Antonio. But this is the Spurs we're talking about. This is a team led by Popovich, a team with a megastar, Kawhi Leonard. I think Kawhi Leonard is just a different animal. He's not Westbrook. This is a completely different star team. It's a player that they have to contend with. And if D'Antoni wants to run and gun, so be it. And Kawhi can put up the numbers. And if he's going to play defense, you be sure he's going to lock down either Harden or Anderson or Gordon, whoever it may be. The Spurs, the only key for them is other players have to step up offensively and not have a repeat of what we saw against Memphis. But all in all, I say Spurs 6 or 7.
All right, man. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on, giving us such good insight. I know you are the man when it comes to talking about the Spurs. Go ahead and let us go ahead and let us know where we can find you out on Twitter and where we can listen to your podcast at on the Locked On Spurs podcast.
Yeah, just real briefly, Locked On Spurs, part of the Locked On podcast network. Just Google Locked On Spurs and you'll find it. It's on plenty of platforms. You can't miss it. And I write about the Spurs and I cover the Spurs for News4SanAntonio.com and Fox29SanAntonio.com, the local media affiliates in the Alamo City. Follow me on Twitter at Jeff G Spurs Zone. And let's talk some hoops. Let's talk some Spurs. Let's talk about how great this podcast is and what Alex is doing at his network and there in his show, and it'll be great to hear. And all Spurs fans should tune in to Alex's other shows every day because he puts out a good product.
Well, I definitely appreciate that, man, and we will have to have you back on if the Spurs do make it to the finals or the Western Conference Finals to talk about that series versus the Warriors.
Oh, it'll be fun.
All right, man. We'll talk to you later.
All right. See you later.
See ya.